All right, we're live. Testing one, two. Testing one, two, three. We're up. Okay. Hello, everybody. And we're live. Okie doke. Um, Welcome to our live show on the 10th of October. And I'm thankful for everybody who's interested in signing in, joining up, and participating in the conversation. So let's take a look at the watch news. Today. And actually, a lot of the things that have been going on in the industry, in the watch industry, they're still rehashing the Rolex controversy about availability of product. Um, the Watchfinder, their latest video was on Alange Unsuna about how they are better than Patek Philippe. Let's see what else has been going on. Just One More Watch has been looking at a bunch of interesting pieces. Let's see. Teddy Baldazar is talking with Kevin O'Leary about collecting issues. Jenny L is talking about the James Bond watch, the one that came out for the latest movie. Now, the interesting thing about that one, oh, hey, Renee, how's it going? Um, the thing about the James Bond No Time to Die Seamaster, I actually have a video on this watch. I reviewed it a few months ago. Um, it's got faux patina, but the color motif of the watch, it tends to be more of a caramel color anyway, so you could almost say that it's not faux patina, it's just colored loom, but it's pretty much a faux patina, but it is a beautiful piece, and it's a Seamaster, a no date Seamaster, which is something that Omega should look into more. A no date Seamaster, because well, Seamaster is a great watch, and some people like the opportunity to have variety. That's one of the few things you have with the Submariner is you can get a sub with or without a date. Well, if you can get a sub, but essentially we're still talking about the style. And I must admit, as much as I love busy watches, wristwatch check, I'm wearing my Longines calendar triple date. There we go. Wearing my Longines calendar triple date moonface, which is a very nice piece, but it's actually pretty busy. I've come to appreciate clean three-handers. I did decide to. Oh, I've got I was out earlier. These are all of my what I call like the well, like a store on the weekends or at night. They have like their evening display. Um, my heavy hitters are still locked up in the safe. I was out this afternoon, and whenever I um, leave the house for any extended period of time, I put the nice pieces in the safe where they are right now. But um, I could still talk about the beauty and the harmony of a no date piece. Like, for example, this Vostok Amphibia GMT is a no date piece. And, some people say a no date piece has a cleaner design ethic because there aren't any holes in the face, nothing to break up the symmetry of the face. And so, yeah, no date watch is a really elegant presentation in one sense. So I completely agree with everybody who thinks the latest Seamaster is a fantastic piece for the James Bond piece because it's a clean, it's an elegant, simple Seamaster, no date with great performance and a very clean design ethic. Yes, kind of faux patina, but like I said, it's not that uh, it doesn't match with the color scheme of the watch. Now, let's see. Anybody have any questions? If not, then we'll keep going through the headlines. Bruce Williams was talking about Tudors, and again, Tudor makes some very beautiful watches, and it's just that some people have the issue. Wouldn't it be nice if we had more choice within the company? Interestingly, even though Rolex is a nonprofit, they act very much like a profit-oriented company in the way they deploy and the way they work with their various brands. And Rolex is very much using Tudor to do the cool stuff that Rolex used to do. Rolex is too conservative now to try to do anything outside of the lines, as it were, and Tudor isn't. So they've managed to do a lot of very nice things with Tudor lately. So the funny thing is, Rolex as a watch company, the group is still a really great watch company in one sense, but it's almost as if they've allowed the Rolex brand to travel farther along the luxury arc, as it were. And yeah, they're basically saying that Tudor is what you get now. So you can't get the Rolex you want, but yeah, sure, we'll sell you Tudor, and they're reasonably priced and they're great watches. But it would be less jarring if it weren't such an obvious swap. Like yeah, sure, you want a sub. I'm sorry, I keep bumping into the damn base where I have the computer, but yeah, okay, you can't get a sub, but buy a Black Bay, or you can't get a Daytona, so buy a Black Bay Chrono, or you can't. They are great watches, but the fact that Rolex has pretty much said, "Yeah, this is what you get." Um, I would almost call it an arrogance because people criticize Omega because they have a lot of different models within various lines. Like you can get a bunch of different Speedmasters, for example, but that very choice also allows people who have the desire to get a Speedmaster. It also gives them an opportunity to get a Speedmaster that's a little bit different than what everyone else has. Whereas with Rolex, it's the old Henry Ford thing, right? You can get the car in any color you want as long as it's black. So yeah, it I don't know how healthy that is for the marketplace, but I think it's also a damaging influence in the long run because yes, these are luxury items, and yes, they can get the money that they ask for them, but it takes away from the product. I mean, if you think about it, right? Why does Lamborghini even exist? Lamborghini exists because Ferrari was a bunch of arrogant jerks when they were talking to someone who actually had a valid input. He was a customer and he made tractors, and so they decided to mock him, but they forget that you know, heavy machinery manufacturer is heavy machinery manufacturer. And so Lamborghini turned around and said, okay, if you don't want to make better sports cars, I will. And Lamborghini set out to do that. Now, interestingly enough, for all of Rolex's efforts to be a better company, to yeah, good one, Renee. Yeah, but I think, and I'll mention what Renee just said in a second. But I just wanted to finish the thought that Um, if you think about, say, for example, Rolex trying really hard to break into the triumvirate, as it were, Rolex wants so bad to be Audemars Piguet, and yet, for example, Alange Unsona, without being arrogant jerks, are considered better than the triumvirate because they make better watches. So, if Rolex really wanted to be considered on par with Audemars Piguet or Patek Philippe, then they should make a better watch. And the bottom line is that Rolex is a very good watch, but it's not high horology. It's a mainstream mass-produced watch. It's an assembly line watch. There's no high horology in a Rolex. Even, for example, the Sky Dweller, which is their most complicated piece, is just simply a GMT with a annual calendar. So Rolex really wants to be a luxury watch, but they seem to not want to work hard enough beyond just making a good watch with a good reputation. Um, they could make a better watch and immediately get that recognition, but they're obviously not. They would rather choose to rely on exclusivity and rely on market forces. Whereas if they just made a better watch, nobody would argue about whether or not Rolex was as good or better than Audemars Piguet. They would just simply see whether or not Rolex was better or not than Audemars Piguet. So yeah, I think Rolex's arrogance in the marketplace is damaging everybody in the long run, and I think they're gonna wind up eventually taking. I don't know if they're gonna take a hit, uh, market-wise, because, of course, there are always gonna be people who want their watches because they're a luxury brand now. They're not really a watch brand. I mean, yes, they make watches, but their focus is obviously not really on making watches. Their focus is really pretty much obviously on making money because if they were focused on making watches, they would stop making some of the, watches that nobody wants, like 34 millimeter diamond encrusted ladies' watches or something like that. I mean, modern women, some like small watches, but yeah, if what would you rather have, Rolex? A shop full of diamond encrusted 36 millimeter, 34 millimeter watches, or a store that nobody wants to buy, or a store full of 38 and 39 and 42 millimeter watches that people do want to buy? But Rolex obviously is trying to keep their legacy with 36 alive because of the I don't know if it's because they want the residuals to stay valuable or what reasons they're doing it, but I think Rolex is trying to keep small watch sizes viable in a world full of smart watches and big watches and people who want to show off watches. If they're that mindset, um, just banking on exclusivity, I don't think is going to work for Rolex in the long run, frankly. Now, Renee, oh, high waisted again. Rolex makes about 800,000 watches a year. Exactly. Well, between 800,000 and a million watches, right? Renee and waisted. Um, they make a lot of watches, and yet they can't seem to. I mean, there are obviously several million people on the planet who could afford a Rolex, but making a million roughly a year, you'd think they'd make enough to address what people want. But obviously, there are a lot of watches in that 800,000 to a million a year that are literally sitting in display boxes. I mean, you walk past a Rolex dealer and all you see are, yeah, m- two-tone diamond covered watches or other off um, mainstream brands. But I mean, if Rolex really cared about that, then they would make fewer of the watches nobody wants and make more of the watches people do want. They don't necessarily have to make more watches, but yeah, they could cut back on the 34 and 36 millimeter pieces. I don't think that there's that much of demand nowadays. I think they want the demand to stay because, of course, they've got a lot of small watches, and I guess they're worried about their residuals. But Renee had mentioned when we were talking earlier about the watch complications and about the date and the hole in the face of a watch for the date window. Yeah, it is a useful complication, as Renee pointed out, but yeah, it doesn't look as good as no date because of the symmetry of the dial. But then you can make that argument about anything. I mean, the holes cut into the face for the windows for this. Um, are also distractions from the dial. This is a very busy watch, but then again, once you go to that direction, the business is in your favor, right? You're trying to then balance how the presentation of the complications is done to the audience. So, you could say, for example, like this is a vintage chronograph, no date. It has a very clean it allow not having a hole for a date window allows you to have, more symmetry in your dial, and that's one of the reasons why a lot of, watch companies like Omega, for example, are going to, 6 o'clock date windows because at least that's at the center of the dial under the 6. It helps keep some of the symmetry going. Now, let's see what else. Let's poke some more through the, watch news. Talking about Patek, talking about, Christopher Ward, at, Just One More Watch. Christopher Ward's an interesting company because they, recently had a, change up there, and, under their new, uh, management direction, they've stopped putting the, Christopher Ward logo at the 9 o'clock, and they're putting it up at the 12 o'clock, where other companies already are putting their, company logos, and, Christopher Ward's also playing again with other design styles. Again, the nice thing about some of these, micro brands, or I shouldn't even say, I wouldn't call it Christopher Ward a micro brand today. There's a small brand, but they're there in that sense. Um, I think I mentioned before about how the fact that a lot of these watch companies are owned by bigger corporations forces them to stay in their lane, as it were. They have to, stay within what they are known to be doing, and they can't experiment anymore. You know what I mean? Like, for example, the Swatch Group owns, Omega, and it owns, Mito, for example. So Mito makes really nice pieces, um, but they'll never really be allowed to challenge Hamilton or Omega or, Breguet, because they're all part of the Swatch Group, and so each of the companies is allowed to be what they were when they were bought, and that's it. No expansion, no variation. Stay in your lane, don't conflict with the other brands. And so a brand like Christopher Ward that has to, deal with, changing its image and migrating forward, at least they're doing something as opposed to some of these, other watch companies that wouldn't change anything even if they wanted to because they're not allowed to by their owners. So let's see. Swatch Group's Nicholas Hayek predicted new sales records for 2022 in a recent interview. I didn't know Nick Hayek was still alive. Um, Good man. And every Swatch Group brand has its place in the watch world and knows exactly. That's what I'm saying, Renee, is that all of these brands, and it's not just the Swatch Group, right? Let's call up, watch ownership again. Just do that real quick. Watch company ownership. If you look at the actual who owns what, right? Um, Swatch Group owns Rado, Longines, right? Um, Mito, Omega, Glasuta Brigade, Blancpain, Harry Winston, Certina, Tissot. So the interesting thing about this, right? All of these companies had a valid identity, design language, but now that they're part of this group, that's all they'll ever be allowed to do. So let's see. Nick is the son of Nicholas who passed away. Okay, thank you, Renee. I appreciate that. So Nicholas did pass away, and his son. Well, it's good that the son is carrying on the legacy of the father. I mean, Nicholas Hayek arguably saved the Swiss watch industry by convincing the Swatch Group to be, created. So that's the you know good and the bad of it, right? That by conglomerating, by aggregating, by becoming a larger, watch group, a lot of these Swiss watch companies saved themselves. But the other side of that coin is now they're part of the team. They can't diverge from their position. You might be a great runner, but now you're the kicker. That's all you're going to do is kick balls. Never going to run, never going to field, not going to catch, not going to throw, just kick. And that's where all of these watch companies now are. Rado has its niche. It's known for its ceramic cases. It's known for some of its interesting designs. It's known for its, sleek post-industrial look. Um, but they're not going to be allowed to make something different. I mean, Captain Cook was a great. piece by Ratto, for example. But it was also a resurrection of an older design. If they had come out with, say, for example, a new diver design, I'd be curious to see what it looked like because the group might be worried that it would compete with some of the other divers' watches in the space if it didn't have a very direct identity within the group, as it were. You know, such an organizational situation likes conservatism, likes conformative, likes predictability. And so, yeah, these watches now that they've these watch companies now that they've been acquired are yeah, they're now locked into place, and they're not going to change for the foreseeable future until they break up into separate companies. If that ever happens, which probably won't, never. Sadly, because of the way we see convergence and mergers and acquisitions in the other market segments, you could easily see uh, MVNF get bought by Swatch Group or something along those lines. So the fact that all of these companies are owned by there are too many watch companies being owned by too few corporations, and I think that that hurts the industry as well. We unfortunately have a couple of bad market forces uh, pushing us towards consolidation, pushing us towards over luxification. In other words, luxury watches are not the be all and end all of watch collecting. Nice watches are the be all and end all of watch collecting. And using exclusivity or using um, absurdly high pricing or strange market leverages to gain fleeting market advantage. Because, um, for example, what Rolex is doing is going to eventually come and bite them. Everyone has been saying it, and I'm not saying it's going to bite them in any financially tangible way because there are too many people who want their watches. But look at Hublot. A lot of people like and buy Hublot, pay real money for Hublot, serious money for Hublot, but it doesn't have as much respect in the space as it could have. So I think that might be the future for Rolex, but the jury's still out there because Rolex does make good watches. It's not that they make bad watches and they're trying to push a bad product. It's just that they make a very good product, and because of the market situation at the end of the quartz crisis, they came out of the race at the head of the pack, as it were, and they managed to maintain their market lead. But that market lead was not created as a luxury watch. Rolex didn't survive the quartz crisis because it was a luxury watch company. Far from it. Rolex survived the quartz crisis because it was a tool watch company making high-end tool watches that were worth buying, that people would still buy even with quartz replacements available. Um, so in one sense, Rolex completely turned their back on their core users and just pushed Tudor in their arms and said, "Okay, you don't want to, you can't afford a Rolex diver, you can't have a Rolex diver. We don't care if you get a Rolex diver. Frankly, go screw yourself. Here's a Tudor." Black Bay. Here's a Tudor Pelagos. Go play with that and shut up and leave us alone. So, like I said, in one sense, the arrogance of Rolex as a market operator is saddening, but it's also understandable. I mean, they're just flexing and using the influence that they've managed to gain in the marketplace, but I don't think it's a healthy trend. So let's see. Renee says I was quite surprised that Longines was allowed to make an annual calendar watch completing. It's a complete calendar. It's not an annual calendar. So you have to adjust this watch every month for the date. It doesn't do the monthly calculations as an annual. So the Longines triple date moon phase literally has the same value 7751 that's in all of the others. The Marie Lacroix, the Marie Lacroix is the one I can think off the top of my head. Possibly the Louis Erard. I could be mistaken, but I mean any uh, vertically oriented full date chronograph moon phase is almost certainly a Valjoux 7751 movement, and it's a complete calendar, not a annual calendar. So it it's not competing in that sense. And if you notice, Omega's got an annual calendar, but it doesn't currently have a moon phase. I mean, I don't. They've had moon phases in their lineup, but they currently don't have a moon phase in their lineup. So in one sense, the Longines loses because it doesn't have you know advanced calendar functions in that sense. But on the other side, it wins because nothing really an Omega has a really complicated calendar complication, a calendar, moon phase, day, date, and that such. So again, you can really see them, you know, price pointing and plotting exactly where you're allowed to be and where you're allowed to compete. No, there is a Longines Master Collection annual calendar. Well, this is the Master Collection complete. Oh, no, no, no. You're absolutely right, Renee. There is a Longines annual calendar, and it's actually it's austere. Let's put it that way. I know exactly which one you're talking about. It's a relatively straightforward face, but it's got a month and it's got a date window at the 3 o'clock. Yeah, I have seen it. But again, there, right? They've kept the Longines annual calendar austere. The complicated one isn't an annual calendar. Their annual calendar is a straight up month and day watch function. But yes, you're right, Renee. They do have Longines does have an annual calendar, but it's not a complicated annual calendar. It's just a month and day function, as it were. Isn't wasn't there a no, their Speedmaster automatic with moon phase in their current lineup? There are a lot of Speedmaster variations out there, so there might be a Speedmaster variation out there with moon phase, but I don't know of one. If anybody does, please mention it. I know they've had moon phases in their past, but I can't think of a current watch in the Rolex catalog that you can buy today that has a moon phase. And I could be wrong. I mean, I almost was wrong. Well, actually, I was wrong, but Renee reminded me about the Longines annual calendar, because they do have that model with the month and day complication. But again, like I said, it's you can see where they're picking and choosing what watch companies within their group are allowed to do what in that sense. As far as other manufacturers with that kind of philosophy, I mean, let's say pardon me, if we look at LVMH, for example, they own Bulgari, Hublot, Chaumet, Zenith, and Tag Heuer. Now, interesting enough, Bulgari, Hublot, Zenith, and Tag Heuer are very scattered as far as style and design. It's not those are actually a group of watches that even if you allowed them to grow and expand and go in different directions, they won't compete a lot with one another. I think that's one of the reasons we see a lot of new interesting things coming out of Zenith and some interesting designs coming out of Tag Heuer, because they've got more elbow room. They can do things without bumping into each other as much. The Kering Group owns Boucheron, Gerard Perregaux, and Ulysses Nardin. Now, I would say Gerard Perregaux and Ulysses Nardin are dangerously close to each other, brand-wise, identity-wise. They both make very high-end watches that are underappreciated in the industry. Um, but again, there, I think that their core design languages are divergent enough that you don't really have to worry. Um, Citizen is an interesting owner group because now they own Frederic Constant and Bulova. And I think if you see some of the newer Citizens, you can really see some of that Swiss DNA in their watches. So Citizen in their case, they didn't buy Bulova or Frederic Constant to subsume them and turn them into versions of themselves. They bought Bulova and Frederic Constant. Well, okay, Bulova is more a representation of the things that Citizen wants to do, but Frederic Constant was, I would say, an injection of IP DNA into Citizen, giving it more of a Swiss flavor, as it were. Um, the Seiko Group, of course, Credo, Grand Seiko, and Orient. they're more of a GM kinda shop, Chevrolet, Oldsmobile, Pontiac kinda thing. Their brands balance one another out as extensions of the line. I don't think Seiko gives enough attention to their mainstream pieces. I think Orient is got a lot more, originality and design variation, but again, I think just as Rolex doesn't wanna be too challenging, Seiko is allowing Orient to be more creative within the group, as it were. And then, Richemont owns, A. Lange& Söhne, Cartier, Vacheron Constantin, Montblanc, Ralph Lauren, Panerai, IWC, Baume& Mercier, Jaeger-LeCoultre, Piaget, Roger Dubuis, and Van Cleef& Arpels. Now, those are all really high-end companies. I would say, um, Baume& Mercier doesn't really have much Cartier. Again, Richemont is another group where their brands bump into each other at the higher end, like, uh, Piaget and Van Cleef& Arpels, I would say are, similar in that sense. And, Montblanc isn't really considered at a level of, say, Jaeger-LeCoultre, or an IWC. I would say it would compete with a Baume& Mercier, but they have a different, line. And Cartier, of course, has its own identity. So, ironically, I would say that the group most suffering from organizational rigidity would be the Swatch Group because Blancpain, Harry Windsor, Breguet, Glashütte, Omega, Mito, Rado, Longines, Hamilton, Certina, Tissot, and Swatch. There's a lot of opportunity for churn and competition within those brands. So, ironically, the first group to organize to save themselves is also ironically the group that can least afford variations within among their members. So, I what would be good is if some of these companies were allowed to go independent, but that's not going to happen. I think I think having all of these companies owned by so few holders, as it were, stakeholders, as it were, makes for a less interesting marketplace. Um, Seiko's watch division has been suffering for the last years, losing revenue year by year. Well, Renee, I've said it before. Seiko unfortunately suffers from perceptions of not being good enough. Um, they make great watches. They make really great watches, but they're plagued and hounded by a reputation of poor fit and finish. For example, you know the old joke: if the indices line up on your Seiko, it's probably fake, which is a really hard joke, and it doesn't really reflect the true situation at Seiko. But the fact that such harsh jokes are being told about Seiko shows that there's a perception issue with the quality of their product. And instead of doing more for their mainstream base product, just regular Seiko, they've been putting a lot of effort into Crador and they're putting a lot of effort into Grand Seiko. And these are such luxury oriented Seiko product that they have to they tried to do Crador without the Seiko logo, and now they started to put Seiko back under the Crador logo because it's a made up luxury brand and people are actually more comfortable with seeing Seiko on the face of the watch. So here's Seiko trying really hard to break out of their mold as a mainstream watch company, but they're not paying enough attention to the quality of their mainstream watches to get any real respect for their higher end pieces, which have the quality. You know, a Grand Seiko is a fantastic piece with a fit and finish that rivals, if doesn't exceed, some of the best Swiss makes. But it's dogged by the chains of the baggage of the reputation it has because it's not doing enough with its mainstream watches, in my opinion. You know, Seiko seems to have quite poor quality control. Forums are full of complaints, and that's exactly what I mean. So, I mean, they make good watches. They make very good watches. They make good movements, but w- where are they? Why are they dropping the ball at QC? Why are they dropping the ball at final fit and finish? Um, it's not that hard. I mean, And today, you could even use a machine vision program and a dang camera to look at each of the watches as it blows past it on an assembly line and just tell you whether or not the damn indices are lined up with the indicators. I mean, the minute hash marks on the rehout should line up with the indices, and the indices should line up with the hands. How hard is that? But the fact that Seiko still has a problem with that in a modern machining and modern manufacturing world shows that they don't care enough. Because if they cared enough, they could do it. It's not hard. It's just like Rolex and the gray market. All of those watches have barcodes on them. Modern manufacturing technology, they could track every single one of those watches from the point it leaves the factory until it winds up in your hands. They can make registration part of warranty acceptance, and they don't because they don't care. Just like Seiko doesn't care that their mainstream watches have a horrible reputation for QC. They don't care because if they cared, they'd do something about it. And Seiko obviously doesn't care enough to make a better watch. They make great watches, and with a little bit of effort, they could up their Q&A. I mean, like I said, nowadays you can use robotic machine assembly, monitoring technology, and you don't even have to have a person making sure the damn things line up. But that the fact that they don't even take the trouble to make sure that the indices line up is, again, arrogance, contempt. The same arrogance that Rolex shows at the high end, Seiko shows at the low end. They don't care enough about you to make their watches better, which is sad because they make good watches and they could make great watches, but they don't make great watches because they make good watches that could be better. And they make very good watches, and they've been making very good watches for decades. But they'll never break out of their perceived ghetto of cheap, good watch. Toyota, you know, um, you could be as good a Lexus as you want all day, but you'll never be a Mercedes. And in some way, that Lexus might be better than the Mercedes, but until people internalize and embrace uh, the quality levels, the fit and finish, the philosophy of quality that you see expressed in certain products, um, which you don't see in Seiko, mainstream Seiko. You see in Grand Seiko. So this is a company that can do it. They just choose not to do it with their mainstream product. So they will suffer under that shadow until they make a conscious decision to make a better watch. Simple as that. Let's see. I think that the problem is that the affordable Seiko watches aren't made in Japan anymore. Well, diversification of manufacturing is, obviously a trend. You want to outsource some of the manufacturing to other places where it's cheaper. But I think that that's a bad mistake when it comes to certain products. For example, Boeing, once they split up their manufacturing, Boeing used to make everything in Seattle, and then they spread their manufacturing across the United States, and they immediately started having problems, fit and finish problems, and assembly problems because uh, they never worked on proper integration of far-flung assets. Like, for example, Airbus. Airbus was started by a group of divergent companies, so they had from the beginning they had to start in widespread facilities across Europe, each making different pieces and assembling them. So they started with a divergent manufacturing philosophy, and Boeing jumped into a divergent manufacturing philosophy without thinking it completely through. And I think that's the same problem that's happening. Some of the mainstream watch companies is that they're diverging, they're expanding, but they're not doing it intelligently. They're offshoring manufacturing without properly ensuring that that manufacturing is integrated into their QC, their design philosophy, as it were. So, yeah, these companies are hurting themselves. Nobody's standing outside of Seiko headquarters throwing rocks in the windows and saying, "Damn it, be sloppier." You know, so these companies are all taking hits because they're forgetting what they're doing. They're forgetting why they're there. I mean, Rolex is taking a hit because they're ignoring their core base. Seiko takes hits because they're ignoring their core base. People who want to buy good, affordable, quality watches. Um, these companies are arrogant. They feel that they have you as a customer in their pocket, and you want them, and you're going to buy their product, and in their minds there's no competition, so screw you. Where I think that's where the micro brands, the watch micro brands are making serious inroads. Is it's hard to make a, you know, micro brand television company. You can't compete with a mainstream television manufacturer making millions of displays a year. Um, but you can in the area of luxury, in the area of high-end products in general, because number one, the numbers are lower, and number two, the people expect a different product, as it were. So the companies that are treating their clients shabbily, I think they're going to get their comeuppance. Unfortunately, we live in a world where you can do a lot of mean things to your client base, and they'll accept a lot of it. But I- I'm hoping that more watch collectors wake up to the fact that they control the marketplace. The watch companies don't control the marketplace. You don't have to buy what they're telling you that you should buy. You don't have to run out and get that 36 millimeter Explorer. You can say, screw that. I've got a 18 or a 19 centimeter wrist, and I don't want to wear a watch that is that diminutive on my wrist. Everybody can tell you all day that small watches are cool. If you don't like it on your wrist, they could tell you all day you're still not going to like it on your wrist, and they're going to make you buy something that you're not happy with. Screw that. You don't have to spend your money. You don't have to give them your money just to pee on your head and tell you it's raining. Um, we need to remember that we control the market. They don't control the market. We choose what we buy. They don't tell us what we should buy. If you listen to them tell you what you should buy, um, yeah, maybe this isn't something you should be involved in. Maybe, I mean, if you're just buying what's trendy and you're buying things that you want other people to appreciate and you don't necessarily appreciate it yourself, then you're really buying watches for other people than yourself. Um, and at the end of the day, it's attached to your wrist and you're the one who has to look at it every day. If you're not happy with it, even if everyone else is, what what does that give you? You It's like that's like being someone who loves hiking and being in the outdoors, but you bought an SUV because everybody expects you to have one, and you die inside every time you drive it because you'd rather be walking out in the woods instead of driving through them. But you have that vehicle because everyone else expects you to have it. No, or wearing a color that you don't like, but everyone expects you to wear. I mean, unless it's a uniform, you should wear what the hell you want, right? And so that goes with watches as well. Uh, you should wear what you love. You shouldn't wear what people are telling you to wear. You shouldn't wear what um, the fad is if you don't like it. I mean, if you like the fad, if you like the trend, like I love blue face steel watches. But if you don't like any given fad, any given trend, small watches or uh, overly large watches, because you could make the same argument against 47 millimeter watches, 45 millimeter watches that you could against 36s. Just as a watch can be too small, it can be too big. So, but I think in the case of the big watches, they're at least trying to fulfill a client desire because there are some people who want big watches and don't realize that too big a watch is not necessarily the best thing. But at least those companies are trying to satisfy what the customer wants, and they're not just saying, "Well, here you don't want that, you want this." Um, any company that says you don't want that, you want this, I'm immediately suspect of. If a company says you don't want what they have, you want what I have, that's a different thing. But if within the own company, if they're trying to direct you within their product line to things that they think you should buy, why? It's your money, it's your wrist, it's your watch. You should wear what you love, what you want, not what other people think you should have or what you think other people think you should want. If that came out right. So, buying things you don't want with money you don't have to impress people you don't like. Yeah, exactly, Renee. And Swiss watch companies didn't transfer the production to countries with lower wages. Well, again, I think I mentioned this in other issues. Um, a lot of those companies have incredibly long legacies, and even if the corporations who own the companies try to do things, there's an inertia within the companies themselves that help protect the companies. I mean, just look at Zenith. And when Zenith went, they went literally bankrupt developing the El Primero movement, and they wound up getting bought by the American Zenith Company, which was their plague from day one because uh, due to the American Zenith Company, they could never sell in America because they were the Zenith Watch Company wasn't the same company. And so when they wound up getting bought by the American company told them to dump all their mechanical stuff. And one of the shop managers actually hid it all. So when the company came back on its own as its own company a couple of decades later, they were able to continue manufacturing with that equipment. So if a company like Zenith literally told their owners to go screw themselves when it came to serious manufacturing decisions. I mean, in one sense, it's very cool that Zenith defied the American owners, but in another sense, it's comical. I bought you, and you're not going to do what I want you to do. So it's an interesting dynamic, isn't it? You've got both the pressures to maintain history, but you also have the pressures to develop and grow forward. And you have to really make the decision: is this a good change? Is this a good development? So in the case of Zenith, with the American owners who had wanted them to switch to quartz watches, they made a good decision in that sense. But in another sense, they weren't a good partner company, right? They defied their American owners. So it has to come from within, but it also has to be supported within. You know, somebody inside of Rolex made a conscious decision to reintroduce a 36 millimeter Explorer. Someone inside Seiko made a decision to not address QC, quality control issues. These were all, people sitting behind desks wearing suits or whatever who made conscious decisions that are hurting their companies. So I think we need to be more vocal as a watch community. And when the watch community expresses itself, it actually gets a lot of things done. So, I mean, it's actually a very influential community if you think about the watch community because uh, you're talking about things that at the low end are several $100s each, and at the high end are several $1,000s each. So the watch community swings a lot of money in a lot of directions. So we are a community to be reckoned with, but we're not expressing our voice enough, and we need to let these companies know that they have to treat us better, make us what we want, and not just shove things in our face and tell us that's what we want, because that's not how it works. I mean, even with James Bond, their new watch, they actually asked Daniel Craig a little bit about how the design should be. I think that's a cool thing. Omega's doing the right things in those senses. Their new chronoscopes, fantastic watches. I think Omega's given the most freedom of movement within the Swatch group, but then again, that's also because Omega has the broadest catalog, so they can get away with a lot of things within the group. They have a lot more elbow room, as it were. So I think Omega's an example of a company that's doing it right. Uh, and I think their numbers are showing it. Omega's really getting good market share. Let's see. Um, Tudor. There we go. Taylor. Hey, Taylor. Do you think Tudor will finally get away from the notion as being the poor man's Rolex? My Tudor GMT doesn't feel too poor for me. You're absolutely. And pal, hi pal. Did they fix the GMT issue with the date? See, now that's an example. Tudor, I just did a video on the Black Bay, and I talked about that issue about Tudor being under Rolex's shadow. I think the interesting thing is, I think they may actually eventually do that because they're doing more fun and interesting things with watches right now than Rolex is. So I think there's a good chance for Tudor to, at least in the mainstream, break out from under his Rolex's shadow because the average person doesn't know that Tudor's owned by Rolex. The collector community does, but the average person doesn't know that Tudor's owned by Rolex, and in their minds it's a separate brand. So the cool things that Tudor's doing is getting traction because people do want to buy that Tudor GMT because it is a cool looking watch and it works well. And Pal did bring up the fact of the GMT issue with the date. I think worst case scenario that'll be dealt with at the dealer level in repairs because Tudor is a big enough company. If people come to them with a damaged product, they will fix it. I think that the date issue is going to be more of an ongoing um, warranty maintenance issue. As people have issues with it, they'll come to their dealers and the dealers will fix it. Some people won't have problems with that date because if I believe it's something with a slipping gear track or something along those lines. So um, that's probably a really tight tolerance issue. If the tolerances fell a couple of microns in the one direction, it slips, and if the tolerance fell in a couple of microns in the other direction, it catches. So I think they have a fix already for it, and I think that the number of watches that are susceptible to that date issue are a subset. I don't think every one of the GMTs has the issue. I think it is a fit and finish issue. I think that there is something that the tolerances are just at the right point to fall in two directions, working and not working, and they probably have a fix for it, if only to put in a thicker tooth gear or something like that. And I believe that is going to be something that'll percolate through the dealer network. People will come to them with the watches as they break, and they'll be serviced either under or outside of warranty. Considering that it's a manufacturing flaw, they should cover it outside of warranty time frame, but they may not just because they can get away with it. But I don't think that the date wheel issue is that much of a problem with the Tudors. I do believe it is an issue, but I do believe that the dealer network is strong enough to handle it, and the reputation of the company is also strong enough to take that hit, as it were. It's not like the problem that they had with the Ming watches, that they were using GMT movements without the extra hand, and they were having problems with the date correction, and then Ming started equivocating about it. Um, I haven't seen Tudor dodge the issue. I haven't seen them talk about the issue, but that makes sense. But I haven't seen them try to dodge the issue either. So I think that the date wheel issue in the GMT will be a blip on the radar, but I don't think that it's going to affect the brand in the long run. Let's see. They have, to my understanding, right. I had a Pelagos for a while. Well, that's cool, pal. It went to crap after a few months. The Pelagos is a nice piece, though. I don't know what your individual experience with it has been, but I haven't heard too many quality problems with the Pelagos. Uh, I've heard a lot about how rugged it is, but then again, like I said, when you're talking about high tolerance mechanical devices, it could just take a little something to put it into I hate to say it, lemon category, where something doesn't fit just right. You know what I mean? In other words, it doesn't fit just right. I know just right is a more of a fitting term, but in other words, it's just off enough to cause you problems. And if that gear had been shaved off a micron thicker or a micron thinner, it would have been true, as it were. So I think it's a warranty. I do think it is a warranty issue. I don't think that the brand is going to suffer significantly from that. Like, for example, Seiko has to suffer under that QC issue. I think that Rolex and Tudor, being the size companies they are, with the level of reputation they have, I think they're going to weather this aspect at the very least. It might make it harder for Tudor to break away from Rolex in one sense, but in one sense, it'll help Tudor break away from Rolex because every time you have a problem, it's an opportunity to create a deeper relationship. So if Tudor handles this situation well with their owners, then it'll strengthen that bond. If I have a problem with my Tudor and I take it in and they take care of it and they don't give me a lot of crap about it, then I'll be a happy Tudor owner ongoing. But if I took my Tudor in and I had problems getting it fixed, or if I had issues with the warranty repair, then yeah, they're going to have problems. But so far, I've heard people saying that yeah, there was an issue, and everyone that I've heard of has taken it in, has had it taken care of. So I think Tudor's on top of it, and yeah, the company's big enough that unless it's a serious issue and they're ignoring it, is that they'll have a problem. Let's see. Wesley, hi Wesley. I just feel as the enthusiast market, we are a small portion. Omega does listen and try. Well, and that's the thing. I think Omega learned a lot from getting its ass beaten like a redheaded stepchild during the quartz crisis. They tried to mainstream into quartz, and they still make. Actually, I don't know if they still make some quartz. I should look into that. But they made some interesting quartz pieces, and they weren't bad quartz pieces. They were just expensive quartz pieces, and quartz's biggest selling point at the time during the quartz crisis was that it was inexpensive and reliable. I think the market has matured. For example, you can buy expensive quartz watches today, and the market doesn't react negatively to an expensive quartz watch. But Omega has bypassed that, right? They went through the quartz crisis. They realized that quartz wasn't the answer for them, and they've completely embraced mechanical. And I think Omega remembers that it's still a watchmaker. Like I said, the things that people ding Omega for, I laud them for. Lots of different models, a lot of variety, gives you choice. It lets you pick something that you like. So you can have you could be in a room with 5 people and you all have Speedmasters and none of you have the same Speedmaster. I think that's a good thing, that everybody gets to have something interesting and unique to themselves. I just got my I postponed my chronograph, uh how a chronograph works episode, because I finally managed to get my hands on a Speedmaster Rattrapante, a split second Speedmaster. They only made them from like for a couple of years, right around the turn of the turn of the century, around 2000, 2001. And so, for example, that's a Speedmaster 2. Uh, Today, now you can get an Aquaterra small seconds. They came out with the chronoscope. They're really doing cool and interesting things, and I think it is because they're listening. I agree with you completely, Wesley. I think Omega does listen and try. Tudor has become its own identity. Let's see. Rolex seems to be able to do whatever they want, and people are still desiring their watches. For Omega, it's different. They have to listen. Well, exactly right. Omega's number two. They used to be number one, and they got sorely thrashed during the quartz crisis, and so now they're number two perception wise, and so they have to try harder. They have to be a better watch. They don't have the room for the arrogance that Rolex shows its customers. Rolex says, buy it or don't buy it. Screw you. Omega's like, well, you don't like it in this color. How about this color? You don't like it with, center seconds. How about small seconds? You don't like it with a white face. How about a blue face? How about a red face? So, yeah, I do believe Omega has a bigger bang for your buck. I mean, every time I try to reduce the number of Omegas in my collection, I wind up buying another one. At one point, I had 4, and then I sold a couple. And right now, I've got the Globemaster, I've got the Seamaster GMT, and I just, like I said, ordered the Rattrapante. I still have my Speed Sonic, but that's at a shop for sale on commission. If you want my Speed Sonic, let me know. I'll sell it to you. But I think I'm always going to have 2 or 3 Omegas in my collection until I have a smaller collection, because they just make a lot of different, interesting pieces. Um, yeah, that are affordable, that you can find in the stores. So let's see, Supercat Curate, brand new. It became very erratic. See, so um, yeah, I think that is an issue. I think Tudor did kind of rush in with their in-house movement. I think the Edit Tudors, I agree with you, pal. I think the Edit Tudors, in one sense, are better than the newer Tudors. I have a Black Bay Smiley with the ETA movement in it. They worked so much on the ETAs to show that they, weren't just ETAs at the end. They wound up being better movements than I think anybody foresaw. The ETA movements in the Tudors they replaced the shock mechanisms, they replaced the hairsprings, they replaced the regulatory mechanisms. So those ETA Tudor models actually have really, really good movements for the price point they have. And But I think the in-house watch movement is a valid one because, again, after the quartz crisis and people migrating back to mechanical watches, um, open case backs became a thing because you spend an extra for a mechanical movement. You want to see that mechanical movement. And then in-house became a thing because if you want to be a high-end brand, you have to have your own because you could be a mainstream luxury brand and have off-the-shelf watches, but everybody knows with an off-the-shelf movement, you can't charge more than $5,000 for a watch because everybody knows how much you paid for the damn movement. It's an off-the-shelf movement. You can work on it and tweak it a little, but at the end of the day, everybody knows how much you paid for it. Whereas an in-house movement, nobody knows how much it cost you. Nobody knows how much you paid for it, so you have more flexibility in your pricing. But um, frankly, I would go with an ETA tutor over a new tutor any day because number one, the ETA movement's more field tested. It's been around forever, whereas the tutor is still a new movement. We don't know all of its idiosyncrasies. I mean, look at what's going on with the Black Bay GMT date wheel. So, on the one hand, people may put down ETA movements, but they're robust. They're proven. They've been running for years, sometimes decades. Some ETA movements have been around for a century, right? I mean, if you think about the Unitas movement, it was made in the 50s, right? So that's a 70-year-old movement you can buy today. So, an in-house movement that was designed on a computer in a hurried sense in a year, it's not gonna necessarily function as well. I'm not saying that all in-house movements were rushed to market, but I think some were. And I think, the rush to have your own in-house movement is a good pressure, but if you, succumb to it too quickly and you push too fast and you don't take the time, then you can have issues. So like I said, you get at a 28, 24 based movement, it may not be fancy, but you know it's going to work. And it's been working in millions of watches for years. So yeah, if a company has a new in-house movement and it starts having problems, that's par for the course, right? These are incredibly complicated mechanical devices. You can't just bang them out and hope for the best. You have to. These things require serious design. Let's see. New watch movements can cause problems. Omega had lots of issues with the early coaxial designs. Well, exactly. I mean, and if you think about it, right, the first Omega coaxial designs were reworked ETA movements because they recognized it was hard enough making a new escapement. They didn't have to reinvent the whole movement at that moment. They created a good escapement, the coaxial. They made it in an ETA. They banged around with it for quite a while, actually, and then they came out with their own in-house designs. But if you notice, no one has said anything negative about the new or the recent 9000 series Omega movements. They're all awesome, spotless, fantastic. The looking into the back of my Omega Globemaster is a joy. So, yeah, I think in-house movements are not a magic bullet. They could be worse than an ETA movement. Just because it's in-house doesn't mean that it's a better movement. It just means that the company took the time, trouble, and effort to make their own movement. That doesn't mean it's a better movement. It just means it's their movement. So you gain on the one side, but you could potentially lose on the other. You might get a movement that's a great movement, but it's a little twitchy. So uh, I'm a big, big fan of the philosophy. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, and don't just simply turn your nose up at a watch because it doesn't have an in-house movement. This is good. Value 7750 base. There's no stigma in not having an in-house movement. There is a stigma in having a shitty watch, right? So I would look at making sure that the watch is a good watch first, and then worry about the other things. Let's see. Dun, dun, dun. My favorite auto movements are Grand Seiko movements. Well, pal, I think I made that point earlier. I think Grand Seiko makes fantastic stuff. Grand Seiko is a great company. Their polishing, their fit and finish are a level above many, many companies. Um, I think where Seiko stumbles isn't at the Grand Seiko level. The Grand Seiko suffers because of the Seiko reputation, and Seiko could address their reputation better, but they don't. But Grand Seiko makes fantastic movements, fantastic pieces. Their high beat mechanical movements are awesome. Everybody talks about the Zenith high beat, but Grand Seiko high beat movements are great movements. But again, the company suffers from the image of its mainstream product. Let's see. The dealer said it was the first time someone come back. Taylor, yes, no one will be able to grow that popular as Rolex, especially to the layman, but Omega being forced to listen to their customers will keep Omega on the right track, in my opinion. I agree with you. The fact that Omega is still struggling to gain its old glory has made it more sensitive to the customers. They need to listen to the customers because they need their customers. Rolex doesn't need their customers. They don't need you. There were a dozen people lined up behind you to buy their watches. As and I mean that's another reason why Rolex isn't very adventurous. Again, right? A new movement can bring problems. Rolex, they're geniuses in that. Their stuff is reliable, works well, excellent fit and finish, top level quality. Um, Not very adventurous, but then that's how you stay out of trouble, right? Let's see. What's the worst videos authentic what's the worst you've owned? Oh, the worst watch. Okay. The worst watch. I hate to say it was a Seiko. I bought a Seiko UFO, um, chronograph, black face, subdials top and bottom. And the minute totalizer, the minute subdial, when the stopwatch, it would never spring back completely to center. And then I took it to a shop and had them work on it. And the damn thing would still never spring back to center. And it pissed me off. It pissed me off a lot because here's a watch I couldn't legitimately sell. I know there are people who will sell a watch that doesn't work properly or they don't like or might be getting close to service, so they'll sell it instead of having to worry about servicing it. But I only sell, I churn my watches for my collection, and I turn my watches to get new pieces for the show and to get stuff I like. But I'm not trying to sell to make a profit. So when I'm selling it, I feel for the person I'm selling it to. I couldn't, in good conscience, sell a watch that I'm having mechanical problems with because then I'd be just passing those mechanical problems on to the person that I sold it to. So I wound up giving the watch away. $600 watch. I wound up giving it away to I think I gave it to my son-in-law, and then he said, "Can I give it to a friend?" Because he didn't like it. And I said, "Give it away. Just give it away." Because at that point, if you sell a broken watch to someone else, you're just as bad as all of the people you complain about, right? So I had this Seiko that I couldn't sell because I couldn't. I paid to have it fixed, and it still didn't work properly. Um, so yeah, it was a Seiko. The worst watch I ever owned was a Seiko. I had a couple of other pieces that had those kinds of issues. I had a Hamilton Pan Europe chronograph that had that problem, but after I took it in to have it worked on, it at least worked properly again. So um, it's easy to have a watch with problems, but the problems should not be because the watch is not properly designed. You can have problems because the watch was dropped or it's been running for a long time and it's worn it down and it needs servicing. But if you have a watch and the hands don't line up to the index, or you hit return on the chrono and it doesn't line up when it resets, that's a shitty watch. I'm sorry. And so I've personally had QC problems with Seiko. and I owned a Seiko spring. I bought a '05 Seiko spring drive, the first Seiko spring drive, and I reviewed it. I've got the video in, and that's a fantastic watch. So Seiko's got these great watches at the high end, and then their mainstream watches. It's as if they say, "Well, pff, we don't care," which is kind of a weird philosophy. They put all of this effort into Grand Seiko, and then their mainstream product is a catch as catch can. Good luck getting a good watch. Uh, that's not a healthy philosophy, in my opinion, and I think that's why Seiko's suffering for it. I think they're trying to expand too much into certain areas before they've taken care of the basics, like making sure the indices line up with the hands on their watches, for example. Um, I wear the watch Albie. Hi, Albie. I wear the watch that has an ETA movement because I know it's a workhorse. Exactly. They're not glamorous movements, but I mean, they're still luxury watches, right? I mean, if I'm dropping $2,000 on a watch with, say, a ETA movement in it, that's not a bad watch. That's a luxury watch. That watch costs more than a lot of people spend on a used car. All right. Well, I mean, okay, 2000 not anymore as far as used cars go, but that's a lot of money by any stretch of the imagination. So, ETA movements are not cheap workhorse movements. They're luxury workhorse movements. What I call mainstream luxury, basic luxury movements. They're going to serve you well. They're actually well decorated for the price point, and they're reliable, and you can get them fixed anywhere. So yeah, I mean, I agree with you completely, Albie. It's a workhorse. Hi, what are my thoughts on the alleged sharp edges on the new 3861 Speedmaster? Well, if it's precision machine steel, right? Even a right angle is going to be sharp on that outer angle. So um, I must admit, I don't know exactly where these sharp edges are, but if they're on the watch itself, they'll eventually wear down, right? I mean, the watch isn't made out of diamond. Steel may be a hard material, but rubbing against your skin and rubbing against your clothing over time is going to soften those sharp edges. And if those edges don't soften, where are the edges? Are there some place where you're going to touch them regularly? Do they dig into your skin? That's something I'll look into, and we'll talk about it next week, for example. But uh, I think criticizing sharp edges on something machined out of steel is a little bit of a reach, in my opinion. Um, if it was machined out of steel, shouldn't it have sharp edges? I mean, I don't know how sharp, like I said, they're talking about here, but if I machine steel to within a micron, the edges better be sharp, right? If the edges aren't sharp, then I'm not machining it properly. So I would say that on face value, sharp edges on the Speedmaster, I would say it was a good thing, right? It shows you that it's being precision machined. Now, if their angles, if the sharp edges are in awkward places or cause discomfort while wearing, well, it's another design issue that they should have addressed. But at that point, you take it to the jeweler and have them buff the edge, unless it affects the look of the watch, right? So again, I don't know enough about the sharp edge issue to comment on it in any serious manner, but my first take on something like that would be it's a bit of a nitpick unless it's something that directly impacts the wearability of the watch. Um, hey, Yukar, I've been looking at a UK made watch. The brand is Fierce Bristol. Do you know about anything about them? No, I don't know the name. I don't know the company Bristol. Um, but if a modern micro brand, something tells me it's probably using an off the shelf movement, right? So it's got a Salida in it or it's got an ETA in it. Um, so as far as that goes, it should be okay. A lot of the smaller brands, what they're making their distinction is in case design and in face design and how they present that functionality to you. So I would say, without knowing too much about the brand, it's definitely worth looking into, and I'll look into it myself and have some more information for you next week if you bring it up in the Q&A. Pardon me. Pal, my daily wearer is a Seiko MM 300, and it's my favorite watch, but the detail on the watch is definitely more Grand Seiko than Seiko. Well, some of their pieces have, Seiko does take some care with some of their mainstream pieces. So they have, you know, mainstream. They have a couple of pieces in the mainstream that are really nice, and then they've got Grand Seiko and Crador. So yeah, I think they're good watches. I'm not saying that Seiko makes bad watches. It's just that it irritates me that a company that could make better watches doesn't take the effort to make better watches. Let's see. Um, we're a quarter after the hour, so I think I'm going to wrap it up. Unless somebody has like a final question or two, then we'll answer them and then we'll wrap up. Um, Hi, Alex. Do you have any thoughts on San Martin? I think San Martin watches are nice. I mean, they're homage watches, right? They're nice, good quality homage watches. I watch Just One More Watch. They do some very interesting reviews on some of them and compare them with some of the other homage watches in their category. So, as far as uh, that goes, I would say in their price category, they're a good company. I don't think they offer any special sauce, as it were, but they make good basic pieces that you won't be disappointed if you buy one. Let's see. The sharp purchase controversy on the new Speedmaster was started by the Timeless Watch channel. Okay, well, we could take a look at that. Um, but again, like I said, we're talking about a block of machined steel, right? Where could the edges wind up, right? Maybe the lug points or the case edges. If the bezel's a little sharp, that would help the grip, I guess. But yeah, it sounds to me like outrage for outrage's sake, something that they can talk about to give them something that they could talk about to give them something to talk about, you know? So, but I will look into it and we can talk about it some more next week. Matter of fact, that's what I'll start up with next week. What about that Omega sharp edges controversy? So, in the German watch forums, there was complaints about that topic too. Hmm. Well, sh- sharp edges on a like I said, a block of machine steel shouldn't be a real issue unless they directly impact how the watch wears. But like I said, that's something I'm going to look into because that'll be a good way to start the chat next week. And during the week, I should get the Rattrapante in. So the regular episode during the week will be probably on how chronographs work. So the way I'm doing it now is we're going to do a live show on the weekends, and then during the week I put together a regular episode just on stuff, either a watch review or in this case, like I said, I'm going to do one on chronographs. So let's see. Thanks. Oh, Alexander, you're so nice to say that. You are all awesome. If it weren't for you all, I wouldn't be here. So thanks everybody. I'm going to sign off for now and talk to you next week. Take care. Bye bye. Congrats to the split second. Yeah, I'll show it to you when I get it. Looking forward to having it myself. Bye, everybody.